Could a blockbuster trade with the Utah Jazz jumpstart Miami's push towards contention? Plus, Giannis Antetokounmpo sent out a cryptic message that has sent Heat fans dreaming. We'll break it all down on today's Mailbag episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. Whether you're tuning in on YouTube or on your favorite podcast app, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg here with David Ramil. Both of us are credentialed Heat media members who cover this team every day. For daily content on the Heat, click that subscribe button on YouTube and make sure you are following us on your favorite podcast app. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Have a jam-packed show for you today, and I mean jam-packed. A ton of mailbag questions. We are opening it up, answering questions about the Heat's offseason, including a bunch of trade ideas, and if the Heat should actually try to move up in the draft to get their franchise player. But first, I want to start, David, with this tweet from Giannis, who was doing a Q&A in the middle of the night, Saturday night. This came out like at 3 a.m. Doing a Q&A, and somebody asked him what his favorite city to be in is. Which city made you the happiest to be there? And Giannis said, the Florida cities.
He's a big Pensacola guy, the Creek is.
Big Pensacola guy. Big fan of the Panhandle. Likes the Gulf. Calmer beaches, corridor. Calmer oceans.
Yeah.
Yeah, this sent the internet a flurry, at least within these Florida cities, right? The two names that come to mind, obviously, you have two Florida cities that have NBA teams, the Orlando Magic and our Miami Heat. You don't really see star players try to make their way to Orlando, with all due respect. So when we hear Florida cities, you think immediately, well, is he talking about Miami? But why then not just come out and say Miami? There's so much to get to here. I think it's interesting. But before we even get into all that stuff, my question to you, David, is simple. Is this something? Is this anything, or is this just a 3 a.m. tweet in the middle of the night that doesn't mean anything?
It's something. I just don't think it's something that Heat fans want. And my feeling is that this is Giannis's way of tweaking the Bucks organization to say, don't overestimate my position here, and don't overestimate your position, rather, and assume that this is all going to work out hunky-dory. I may want to go elsewhere, and if that's the case, I'm opening up the field. So you better get the best deal done possible, whether it's a Florida city or not. And look, you're absolutely right. There are only two options here. Orlando isn't a bad option. I mean, you're adding Giannis to a team that plays excellent defense, could use a scoring punch, has some problems in terms of shooting, but if you can find a way to keep Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner and maybe give up some of the other ancillary pieces that are on this roster in order to add Antetokounmpo, I don't know what that would be. We haven't looked into any potential Magic trade or anything like that.
I'd be shocked if they didn't have to give up at least Franz.
So that makes things a little bit more difficult, but
yeah,
it's at least the system is there. Orlando's a great city. I could see as a family man that he's interested maybe in having proximity to theme parks and stuff like that. It could absolutely be a destination for him and his family. But it doesn't seem to align with what we know of Giannis. It seems like he's more of the, I don't know if he's necessarily big on the metropolis areas like Miami, but I think that's kind of, NBA stars in general tend to gravitate towards those areas.
Yes.
So I don't think, again, if he really wanted Miami and he doesn't want to be tampering, this might be the best way of kind of circumventing that. But it's also, I think, just Giannis kind of tweaking the Bucks organization and saying, clock is ticking, guys. Let's get this done.
I think that Giannis would prefer to stay in Milwaukee if all things are equal. The problem is that all things are not equal. Eric Neem, who covers the Bucks for The Athletic, had this piece last week about this is what the Bucks need to tell Giannis to keep Giannis this offseason, because he is at a career crossroads. The reporting around it is that he's considering making a move, right? And he should, right? It's been 3 straight years of disappointing playoff exits for the Bucks. He's been a part of the reason, but he's not been the whole reason.
Right.
And within Eric's piece, it was basically, and it was very depressing, but I don't really know what else Eric could have said in this piece. It was, hey, we could bring this year's team back. Don't worry, we're not going to lose Gary Trent Jr. because we could sign him with our mid-level exception. And that was the sales pitch. And I'm like, that team with Damian Lillard coming back from an Achilles, that's the pitch? And he's right. That's the pitch. So unless Giannis decides, unless the Bucks could somehow find a way to improve the Kyle Kuzma spot, which seems like that's not going to happen. They have one future draft pick all the way out in like 2031 or something to trade. So it just feels that if Giannis wants to compete for a championship, he's not going to be able to do it in Milwaukee for at least a season. And then who knows what can happen. But how much longer does he want to be waiting on this Bucks team that hasn't been able to, that's kind of lost talent since they last won a championship? This is not a team that's added talent. So I think your point about he couldn't just say Miami.
Right.
You can't do that. So he says Florida cities, which I don't know what he's doing at 3 a.m. Props for thinking like that. Because I'll tell you what, Saturday night at 3 a.m., I wouldn't have been thinking like that if I was still up.
Yeah.
So
he would have been much more direct, like most of us, I think.
Yes. I have to talk myself out of going on Twitter at 3 a.m. on Saturday nights. I'm like, nope, nothing good can come of this for me. But for Giannis, he did get people buzzing about the potential. The other part that you said too, which I want to highlight here is, yeah, NBA players tend to not, again, no offense to Orlando. I lived in Orlando for 4 years. NBA stars tend to choose Miami over Orlando. And there's this idea out there that Giannis, because he comes from humble beginnings in Greece and all these things, isn't the same as all these other players. And to me, I just don't really buy that. Right. That's sort of, it feels like weird to even just assume because you come from Europe or something, because you don't come from America, that you don't value big cities and all these things. Giannis has been in the United States for a very long time. He understands as well as anybody else what a market like Miami, which isn't New York or LA, I'm not saying that, but is a glamour market, what that could do to you and your brand. To assume that he either doesn't know or doesn't care about that is, it feels a little off to me, and I don't like kind of going in that direction.
Yep.
I will believe that NBA players, you know what, not even NBA players, I will believe people enjoy warm weather cities until I don't, right? Until you tell me I don't love Miami, I'm going to assume you love Miami because it feels like 80% of the world loves at least the idea of Miami.
Geography aside, what's the appeal of Orlando versus Miami? Because I'm trying to figure it out. And I think you have to take all the different factors into consideration. Roster construction, I'd say Orlando, just based on their record over the last couple of seasons and their trajectory, probably the better team.
Yes.
Yet, when you look at everything Miami has in their favor, the ability to keep certain players, all-star level caliber players, the head coaching situation, not that Jamal Mosley is by any stretch a bad coach. In fact, I think both of us would agree that he's a very good coach.
Yep.
But and then also you have to measure the stability of the franchise and the leadership and everything else. And despite the criticism that Pat Riley and the front office has gone in South Florida, outside of that, very well respected and given a lot of credit, and I think well-deserved credit, for building contenders pretty regularly. So when you look at where Orlando is right now versus Miami, I think there's one thing that separates them. And again, Miami having already won championships and having already proven that we can accommodate superstars certainly is in their favor. But there's the other side of it, the flip side of that same coin, which is I could be the guy, not Shaquille O'Neal. I could be the guy who brings the first title ever to Orlando. And if that's the case, that might be more appealing to Antetokounmpo where he's at, because that's a real legacy builder.
That's interesting.
Not Dwight Howard, not Penny Hardaway, not Shaquille O'Neal, nobody, me.
That's interesting.
That might be something that.
The thing is, he did bring the first title in a very long time to Milwaukee. So he wasn't the first, but it might as well have been.
Sure.
So we kind of did that thing a little bit already. And it's one thing to bring a first title to since 1973 to the Knicks, or even the first ever
Right.
title to Brooklyn or the Clippers, or Cleveland in LeBron's case. But it's like, yeah, I brought the first ever championship to the Orlando Magic, and people would be like, again, no disrespect to the Magic, but it'd be like, all right, that's kind of cool. I don't know how much that matters in sort of NBA history.
Yeah.
The Orlando Magic aren't exactly an iconic NBA franchise. Even if they've had way more success than people assume, I wouldn't put them on in terms of iconic franchises or big markets. What I think, too, is, look, the Magic are a better basketball team right now. They could put a better deal together if they did the Franz Wagner piece or all the draft picks. Like, they have the potential to beat any Miami offer, I think. But the other part was star players, and this is the thing with Houston, too. Oh, Giannis should go to Houston. He'd be the final piece on that. Star players don't look at this the same way we look at this as analysts, as outsiders. We could say, oh, wow, Houston is a Giannis away from making the Western Conference Finals. Or Orlando is a Giannis away from being a serious team in the Eastern Conference. Giannis doesn't look at it that way. Giannis looks at it and says, who do I want to play with? Not what situation do I want to play in? Where am I the final piece? He doesn't care about final piece. He wants his pieces. He's looking for the final piece. Who do I want to play with? And as good as Orlando is, and I love that Orlando Magic team.
Yep.
I think the future is bright. I love Jamal Mosley. I love Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner. I love Jalen Suggs. You know that about me. One of my favorite players in the league. If you're Giannis, are you psyched about playing with any of those guys? I don't think so. Paolo and Franz, I'm not saying you're not, but they're also not guys that are drawing you to their city. You're Giannis. You're 30. Those guys are just inching into the beginnings of their primes.
Yeah.
So you think about a guy like Bam, an Olympic gold medalist and multi-time All-Star. Even if you don't think he's as good as Paolo, he has a little bit more of a draw for stars than even Paolo would. Because the other part is, that's Paolo's team.
Yeah.
And I could probably go to Miami, and I know how I would play with Bam. And that's just how stars think.
Yeah.
Even if we all agree as NBA analysts, yeah, Houston, that's the right fit. Orlando, that's the right fit. Imagine what you could do in Oklahoma City or whatever these things are. Who do I want to play with? That's how stars think. They don't think about it the same way we all think about it on the outside. Let's open up the mailbag next. We got a ton of questions to get to. We'll do it next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. You ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out or some online shopping, maybe a little entertainment sprinkled in here or there. Well, it's easy to lose track of your finances, but that's where Monarch Money comes in. They're your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized how much I was spending on food and entertainment, and believe me, it was more than I wanted to. But now I budget smarter and I save more, and they've got the convenience of having everything all in one place. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you could just use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Open up with the mailbag. We're going to start with questions submitted by the Locked On Heat Insider community via Substack. You could join the community with the link in the show notes. This first question comes from Malachi, who writes in, what do you all think of Bleacher Report's trade idea about the Jazz and the Heat making a trade this summer? The Heat get Lauri Markkanen and Collin Sexton. If I'm being honest, I wouldn't be opposed to this trade. I actually might tend to like it at the end, but I don't know if Lauri Markkanen is that superstar that we need. So the full details of the trade, I went and looked it up. This is what Bleacher Report proposed. The Heat would send out Andrew Wiggins, Nikola Jovic, Terry Rozier, Duncan Robinson, this year's first-round pick, so the 20th pick in this draft, and a 2029 first-round pick, top 5 protected. In exchange, they would get Lauri Markkanen, Collin Sexton, and Jordan Clarkson. A big deal, a lot of moving parts. David, I don't hate it. What about you?
I don't either. This is plan B to the, I think, primary plan of adding a superstar is just, you know what? We're not going to add that superstar. but we're not where we want to be. And we saw what happened in the playoffs. As limited as Miami's run was, they just don't have the role players. They don't have the star, certainly, but they don't even have the role players to supplement and provide the complementary scoring and defense and specialization that Miami needs. They need a player who can put up points. They need a player who can play high-level defense, etc. I think they need a lot of different things. Even if they were to add a superstar, they still need those things because Miami's bench is they're just too limited. That's just the way it works out. And so this is the alternative in terms of you can build a roster that's deeper and better. They're not going to be in any potential matchup. You're not going to have the first best player. You might not even have the second best player, depending on whether or not Tyler takes a leap next year. But if you can have 3 through 9 in terms of the best players in a comparison between teams, that might be enough. That might be enough. And that might position you to add that superstar a year down the road in some ways. And you can at least say we've added the right role players. Now we're just missing that 1A, and they can go about getting them in 2026. I know that's a long wait, but I think it's as good a if you can't add that superstar this offseason, then it's as good a plan as any.
Yeah, I don't hate it. I like the idea of going for depth and cleaning up the cap sheet at the same time, because in this deal, you'd be getting off of the Terry Rozier contract, which is huge. You might be moving Duncan Robinson in a star trade or anything else, so I don't really know if that makes a difference. The Wiggins contract is fine, but you're getting Markkanen back, who's a better player, even if that contract is going to be pretty big. You are going to be paying potentially Bam, Markkanen, and Tyler Hero $50 million each in 3 years. But to your point, if it's Markkanen and Bam, you even can sign Tyler Hero to that extension. That extension doesn't kick it in 3 years. Who knows? Who of those three is still around in 3 years, right? You almost just say, we'll deal with that in 3 years. We feel good about that trio with this depth right now. I just sort of sketched out what the top 10 would be. I don't really know what the starting 5 would be. I think there'd be a couple of competitions for spots.
Yep.
Which is a good thing. But let's call it Sexton, Tyler Hero, Lauri Markkanen, Bam, and Ware as your starting 5. You put Markkanen at small forward the way he played in Cleveland. You could even move down and move Jaime Jaquez Jr. into the starting lineup and have Markkanen and Bam as your starters, and then move Ware to your backup 5, whatever. You'd have Davion Mitchell potentially still if you re-sign him. Jordan Clarkson coming off the bench. We know what he's capable of off the bench. Haywood Highsmith, Kyle Anderson, those guys would still be on the roster. That's a pretty solid top 10. It's lacking that true superstar, to your point, right? And that's why this is probably a plan B. I don't hate it. What would make me nervous is that 2029 pick out in the future, because then it gets really hard to start trading stuff because of Stepien rules. That if you wanted to make a move in a year, it would be really hard to build a trade around draft picks. You would have to build a trade around personnel, and that would look like something like Tyler Hero or Lauri Markkanen going out. And at that point, it's almost like
resetting again.
Yeah, it's like, why'd you even do it? But then again, depending on who that star is, who knows? And you can't bank on that star ever being available or whatever. So in the meantime, if you want to do it, you can do it. It's a lot of stuff. I don't hate it. I don't really see Miami doing it, but who knows? Let's go to the next one. Malachi writes in, is there any way that the Heat can get Anthony Davis? Personally, I think Anthony Davis would fit nicely with Bam in the front court, and that could be the star that we're looking for. We know AD and Bam work in the front court because Team USA won a gold medal with those two guys in the front court, and Bam loved playing with Anthony Davis. I don't know if Miami could get Anthony Davis, but it's sort of the idea behind drafting Kel'el Ware was sort of the same thing.
I can't see Dallas making that move. You took so much flack, and well-deserved, for trading Luka Doncic and getting AD and saying we're going to retool our team and reestablish a new defense-based identity, et cetera. Yeah. Well, then you trade away your best defender and your biggest star there. Although I guess you could make a case for Kyrie. But yeah, I don't see it. And there are concerns too. Even if it was just a good deal for Miami, his health history to me is problematic. His availability is a concern. Just went through that with Jimmy Butler. I don't see it. I mean, it would work on many levels. We could break that down. He'd start at center, right? Or he could switch.
He would start at center, and then Bam would play at power forward. But you're investing then $100+ million into your front court One of those guys is injury prone and Anthony Davis. None of those guys is a true number one option.
I don't see it happening.
I don't see it either. I think you just say, yeah, Kel'el Ware will never be Anthony Davis, but we're paying him for $5 million a year, whatever it is. And he kind of gets as close. He kind of does the thing that we need, which is just Bam plays power forward. That's sort of the idea there. It would be cool. I don't see it happening.
Versus the Utah trade package, which of these scenarios do you like better? Acquiring a star like AD or building depth with Utah?
I like the Utah trade, a star like AD or a star as in AD, because I prefer the Utah package more than just trading all the stuff it would take to get Anthony Davis. And then it's like, we got Bam and Anthony Davis. We probably don't have any guards because it take at least, like, Tyler Hero would have to be part of that package going to Dallas. And it's like, okay, cool. So now we've got Terry Rozier left over, and maybe we bring back Drew Smith, and that's our backcourt with AD. It doesn't work. Last one here before we move on to the rest of the mailbag. A. Lamas writes in, why is everybody putting Andrew Wiggins into a KD deal instead of Terry Rozier? If they're trading KD, wouldn't they want to tank and take the expiring salary instead of the player? Also, if we do keep Terry, what kind of player can we get for his expiring money / his expiring money plus a pick? Everybody's putting Wiggins in a KD deal. I understand. I think the Heat would say you can have Wiggins or Terry Rozier. You would have to have one of those salaries in there to get up to the salary matching for Durant, plus Duncan Robinson, plus other stuff. But it would have to be either Wiggins or Rozier. And I think the Heat would say, you pick. Do you want the expiring contract in Rozier, or do you want the better player on a value contract like Wiggins, or fair contract like Wiggins? I think that while I understand why some people would say, oh, they would probably take Rozier, they could just take Wiggins and then flip Wiggins and get stuff back. And that's if they wanted to do that. So I think they would do that. And if Duncan Robinson was part of the deal, they would still be getting some of that cap relief that they're looking for. Yeah. I just think the Suns would ultimately just take Wiggins and just figure it out, as opposed to a negative. Like, why would you take on a negative asset in Terry Rozier? To me, the Rozier trade becomes a lot more likely in February near the trade deadline than it does this summer.
But you also know that somehow he'd start putting up those Hornets type numbers again in Phoenix, right?
Phoenix,
when that situation
That's such a good point. All right, we're going to move on. Are Heat fans down on Kel'el Ware? We're going to talk about that, plus a potential move for Miami to move up in the draft to get their franchise player. We'll talk about all of that next here on Locked On Heat. All right, Max writes in, why are Heat fans so down on Kel'el Ware now? His first playoffs weren't great, but he's a rookie, and the rest of the team was just as bad. If anything, Spoelstra should have left him in a game to work through the mistakes. Ware has more skills offensively that could be shown as well. Are Heat fans down on Kel'el Ware? I guess like Max is pretty tuned into the Heat Twitter part of the discussion, but I think mostly people are pretty happy with the rookie season Ware had.
This is news to us. I think maybe we preached it for too long and too consistently, but we always knew the score when it came to Khalil's development is that it was going to be a process. He wasn't going to show out. I mean, he's had great moments, but I don't think either of us were convinced that we had superstar potential sitting on the bench or anything like that. Nor do I think that it's fair to expect him to be a great player right away. And if he doesn't reach those levels, that you would be disappointed in what he did. He made progress. That's as good as you're going to get for a mid-round selection with as young as he is and the kind of potential that he has and the physical tools that he has, but also the physical limitations he has. You knew what you were getting, and I think he mostly lived up to that. We had to rank his season. I think both of us fairly would give it a B-.
Would you? How would you measure his season against Jaime's and Nico's as rookies? Better or worse?
Okay, Nico's was far worse because he just had very little playing time and didn't have an opportunity to show anything. Jaime was so plug and play ready, and he thrived so quickly and replacing Jimmy Butler in certain lineups and having big games and big moments that it was the far better season, I think, as a rookie. But I think Kel'el has more potential than either of those two players. Maybe not more than Nico, but certainly has shown
showed more potential early on than Jaime.
Yeah.
And was more productive than Nico, obviously.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Look, I think you got to feel good. He played 73 playoff minutes, started 4 playoff games, 18 and a half minutes per game in the playoffs. We can nip and tuck about little, like, should he have played more? Should he have just given him garbage? All this stuff. Whatever. The guy got playoff experience as a 20-year-old against a really good Cavaliers team that ended up getting hurt at the worst time, and it was non-competitive against the Pacers in that second round. I think the Cavs are better than what they showed in the second round. But, yeah, it's fine. Would I say that Kel'el Ware is untouchable? No. He would be far on my list of the last guys that I would want to trade because of what he means for Bam Adebayo in that front court and all the potential there. But, yeah, I think he was also this idea that he was going to be this high-level starting center right away. And you know, fans have a tendency to kind of go all in on their rookies, and they have they have 2 good weeks in a row, and you're like, oh, my God, what a steal. I can't believe we found this guy. Is he going to be a superstar? We did the same thing locally with Jaime. We didn't. People did with Jaime. And our thing all along was, guys, it's really hard to play in the NBA, and it's even harder to play in the NBA playoffs against grown men who have done it before. Kel'el Ware has never even come close. He wasn't even getting that consistent playing time in college.
Right.
He was raw. People forget how raw we were talking about this guy coming out in the draft. Everybody, this is a project. The Heat would tell this is a project. The fact that he was starting in the playoffs speaks a lot to the development that he made over the course of his rookie season. So I think you got to feel pretty good about what it was. All right, moving on. Jay the Fox 101 writes in on Twitter, what is the biggest thing that the Heat have to address this offseason? We could spend a whole show on this, but if you were to just say one thing that if the Heat did it, you'd feel pretty good at least about their offseason, what would it be?
Adding a superstar. Like, I'm not no specific name, but I think that's just where it has to start. I mean, I think we're both in agreement that's your plan A in terms of getting this team, this current iteration, to reach as much potential as they possibly can. It's not the last move you have to make, but it certainly should be the first one. So that would be my priority, and I think it's the front office's priority as well, as to add a superstar, because then depending on who you keep on this roster, their roles are maximized. They can be more into the complementary roles that I think they're designed for or capable of. And that being the case, it works better as a team to have that superstar in place and have everybody else find ways to complement him and add to their own games as a result, because they can specialize in certain aspects, knowing you've got that superstar who you can always count on. That should be your baseline. Right now, Miami's floor is so low because they don't have that superstar, and their ceiling is lower because they don't have that superstar. Like, they just have an inherent baked in problem with this roster, because you don't have great depth. You have a lot of it, and none of it is specialized in great. And then you don't have that superstar who could take you to other heights as well. So I think that's where your first priority is.
It's why this team played so well and looked elite when Jimmy Butler was engaged and playing like a star player, whether that was in the 2023 finals run or when he picked and chose his spots over the last couple of regular seasons. It's why this team looked so elite. And people would say, why can't we do this all the time? And if this team had a superstar player all the time at the top of the pecking order, all of it would click into place. I'm not saying that they would go on to win a championship, but they wouldn't lose 10 games in a row. I promise you that. They'd be over 500. They would be a solid playoff team, which is what I think they should have been over the last 2 years, except they weren't getting that production from their superstar player. Last one, we got so many mailbag questions, David. We're gonna have to split this episode into 2 parts. So we're probably gonna do another mailbag episode for tomorrow, but we got one more here. Richard writes in, I'd be willing to offer Bam Adebayo for Dylan Harper. I think Dylan Harper is the best player in the draft. My girlfriend's from Jersey, so I watched a lot of Rutgers this year. His game is amazing. Natural score, 6'4" with a 6'10" wingspan. It's what you need next to Tyler Hero. I saved a banger for our last question for part 1 of our mailbag, David. Trading Bam for Dylan Harper. So let's talk about what this really means. Dylan Harper is the consensus number 2 guy in this draft behind Cooper Flagg. And a lot of people are saying, if not for a generational prospect like Cooper Flagg, Dylan Harper would have gone number 1 last year. He is usually a number 1 type of pick. But you've got Cooper Flagg in this draft, and so he's going to be number 2. But he's clearly separated himself from the rest of this class, where it's like Cooper Flagg in his own tier, Dylan Harper in a tier by himself, and then you've got 2 or 3 other guys that are below that, and then the rest of it. I think Dylan Harper's awesome. But what you're talking about, and there's a little debate about whether or not San Antonio would take Dylan Harper at number 2 or whatever, but whether or not they take Dylan Harper, you would have to move up to number 2 to get Dylan Harper. That would be the idea. The idea of offering Bam for Harper, and I'll remind you of a conversation we had last week, David, where we were talking about the Pacers model.
Yes.
And how they traded their multi-time All-Star center, Domantas Sabonis, for a second year but a young guard in Tyrese Halliburton, and how that changed the trajectory of their franchise, and now they're in 2 Eastern Conference Finals. And it's that kind of courageous move, ballsy move, whatever you want to say, that can turn things around for a team. I don't know. For the record, I would not do this. And I think Dylan Harper's awesome. He's getting compared to James Harden, Jalen Brunson, these kinds of these number one kind of guards. And if you look who's left in these playoffs, it's Halliburton's Pacers, Shea's Thunder, Brunson's Knicks, and Anthony Edwards' Wolves. Having an alpha dog scoring guard helps get you into that conversation. The Heat obviously don't have that. So the idea of trading, though, your franchise player in Bam Adebayo for a guy who's never taken an NBA court, I don't know that there's any team that, even what the Pacers did wasn't that. You got a year of Halliburton in the NBA to say, okay, this guy can at least play. For the most risk-averse franchise in the sport, this would be an insane departure of characteristic for the Miami Heat. I don't see it happening. And for the record, again, I wouldn't do it. As much as you might like Dylan Harper as a prospect, I got to at least see him play some NBA minutes before I do something this dramatic.
That's it. I can add to that, but it's basically no notes. You don't take a chance like that. If you're in a position where you want to rebuild, and that's not where this team views itself, and we all have to come to grips with that. Not debating the right or wrongness of it. It's just, this is not what this franchise does. They're not going to trade away their centerpiece for a guy that they've never seen and could bomb. That's just not who this group is. And I don't think they're in a position where they can afford to be. They're not going to just say, we're going to punt on the next 5 seasons because we don't know if he's going to emerge. He could emerge. And you consider what happened with Halliburton. Again, great point. And I was just thinking the same thing. Like you at least saw a year of him and you could say, okay, this kid's got it. He wasn't going to do it in Sacramento. They didn't have enough around him where they're going to be able to go to that next level. They had to make that trade. But if you can get a guy like Halliburton who's proven it and shown potential on top of that,
right,
that's the smart move. That's not what this is. This is, well, we kind of hope it works out. And I know that's just the nature of the draft, but there's enough cases there of players that a lot of franchise hoped would be that player and weren't.
This is an NBA 2K trade. This, and if it doesn't work out, you can always hit reset on your franchise mode. It doesn't work like that. I'm telling you, it's not. There's not a franchise in the league that would do that trade. A comparable, like whatever the comparable trade is for their organization. There is not a team in the league that would do that trade. Now, for Cooper Flagg, for Victor Wembanyama, that's a little bit different. And there's like the Bucks might do something like that because they have to, because Giannis wants to get out. If your star player isn't asking out, there's not a franchise in the league that would do this trade. The other one that comes to mind, David, is when the Spurs traded George Hill for the pick that turned out to be Kawhi Leonard. But George Hill was not Bam Adebayo to those Spurs. That would have been trading Tim Duncan for Kawhi Leonard. That's not to compare Bam to Tim Duncan, but you know what I'm saying. Or even Tony Parker for Kawhi Leonard. That's not what they did. If you could turn Andrew Wiggins into Dylan Harper, if you could turn even somebody like Tyler Hero, who's coming off as All-Star, I still don't know you would do it unless it's something that you're scared of the extension and you don't want to do it. Something like that, maybe. But yeah, there's not a franchise in the league that would make their version of this trade. As fun as it could be.
They shouldn't move up. They just have to hope that player is kind of below the radar and could fit into that same range that you were talking about, a Leonard, an Antetokounmpo, a guy that might have some risk tied to his name and might fall between 10 and 15, maybe even 10 and 13.
And then try to move
so
up.
That you can move up from 20th. And then would you be willing to trade the 20th pick and Nico or the 20th pick and Jaime for a guy that they think might slip to that range that seems much more likely for this team to do. I could see that, because not only would it clear up the glut of what you have on this current roster, but you also take a chance on a player that they think might be a great complementary piece. I just don't know who that is. I don't think I know enough about the draft to say there's somebody between 10 and 15 that has star-like potential the same way Kawhi did.
Maybe we will when we get into our blue notebooks, which we got to start doing our research on that here pretty soon. We're going to get into part 2 of our mailbag tomorrow. We've got a question. Brinks writes in, is Zion Williamson the move the Heat make? We'll answer that on tomorrow's episode. That's it for today. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen today. For your second listen, check out Locked On NBA Game Night. Every game, every night until an NBA champion is crowned. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find NBA Game Night on Locked On NBA on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts.